speak to you in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. About 4 or 5 years ago, as some of you may recall, I was really working on the question of church growth and how to become better evangelists as Anglicans. And those two words don't necessarily go together very often. And it's a shame, really. And so I felt that it was a shame. And so I did my typical thing. You better learn about it. What do the experts have to say? And so I read books on church growth, evangelism, and so forth. And I liked some of them and didn't like others. And one book that was actually very important to me had a chapter which stuck with me for all the wrong reasons. That's why I'm starting my sermon today, because I've been wanting to preach against that chapter for years. And today is my chance. The chapter divided Christians up into different categories, social, cultural categories of Christian. There are activist Christians who see the gospel as the imperative to get out there and change the world and make it a better place. There are civic Christians who see church involvement as essentially part and parcel of a wider civic involvement, where you're a good citizen, and part of being a good citizen involves being involved in your church and volunteering, and it's all part of this whole civic life. There are evangelical Christians, where it's all about saving the soul and getting out there and saving as many people as possible. There are sanctuary Christians who say life is hard and painful and difficult, and what we need to do is create a safe space where people can be comforted with God's presence and the mystery of God here, and that's what sanctuary Christian is. And then there are the golden rule Christians, and these are the worst Christians ever. The book didn't quite say that. Maybe that's just what I heard. But when it described the golden rule Christians, I went, wait a minute, that's me. So today we heard about the 2 commandments. And so what I want to share with you today is why that's my Christianity right there, personally. This is very deep. Don't touch your chest with a microphone on it. Bang. This is very deep for me in terms of how I live my life. And you know that I'm academically inclined, and I like to read books and learn as much as I can about theology and biblical studies and all the rest of it. But really, when it cashes out, my faith is very, very simple. Love God, love your neighbor. That's it. That's really it. And the rest is gravy. The rest is learning how to do that better. Right? And so I read theology so I can love God and love my neighbor better. I learn, I try, I serve my fellow human being because I love God and because I love my neighbor. And the problem that I have in being a 2-commandment Christian, as I call myself, is that that's not easy. That's not a cop-out, right? It doesn't mean that I don't care about theology. It doesn't mean that I don't care about being evangelical. It doesn't mean I don't care about being an activist in society. All of those things spring from trying to follow those 2 commandments with your whole being. So let's talk about those 2 commandments. Let's talk about the easy one first. Love your neighbor as yourself. We all know what that means, right? Well, I still haven't got it as much as I'd love to get it, even in my understanding, let alone my ability to do it, which is even harder. So even just trying to understand it, here's the first question, what about loving yourself? What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? Does that mean to sacrifice yourself for the other? Does that mean that you balance the needs of other and self? Does that mean you have to love yourself first before you know how to love the other? All of that is an active conversation. I'm not giving you the answer because it's different for every person depending on where in their life they are. Some people need to know that until they learn how to love themselves, they are not going to be able to love others. And the job in their life at that point in time is to learn how to love themselves. So get out of the abusive situation, for example, right? The inappropriate response when you're in a situation of abuse is, how do I love my abuser? Deal with that in a minute. First, get out of the abuse. Then learn how to forgive your abuser. Then learn how to love your abuser. That's how this happens. And when you're in the situation, it's unhelpful. In order to love your neighbor as yourself, you have to, at that point in time, learn to love yourself as you are. Be a neighbor to yourself. So that's one of those wrinkles in what sounds easy, love your neighbor as yourself. Another one that I continue to struggle with. When I was young, I knew what that meant. Love your neighbor as yourself. And here's an example of a really easy thing that it means. It means when I hate it when somebody does something to me, I don't do that to other people. Right? Obvious, something that's easy to do. I hate it when people talk down to me or treat me in a certain way or are aggressive to me, so I would never be aggressive or condescending to anybody else. Well, that's pretty easy. The trouble with that is that not everybody is me. And so there's a narcissism built into that interpretation of the commandment, where, for example, I'm an introvert. You may not know this, but when under stress, my response is, just leave me alone. I don't want your pastoral care. Thank you very much. I know you love me. That's great. What I really need to do is crawl into my hole and wait till I get better. Right? That's me. And so when other people are in distress, treating them like myself is to leave them alone. Right? That's loving your neighbors yourself. But what if they're not like me? What if they don't need to be left alone? They need to have you get through the bubble and say, I know you're feeling isolated and lonely. You need some love. Have some love. I know you say you don't want it, but I know you really want it. So have some love. Right? Some people really are like that. I would not be like that. If someone were doing that to me, I'd say, no, I really mean it. Go away. I get it. I appreciate the sentiment. This is not helping me. Right? And so in learning that other people are not you, to love your neighbor as yourself is not to impose a kind of narcissism on your relationships with others. To say, everyone is like me, therefore I will do what I think I like and do that to others. The hard part about loving your neighbor as yourself is to realize that you need to know what the other people need in terms of their love and to learn how to communicate and learn how to listen to them, to say, what do you need? How can I love you the way you want to be loved? Because that's what I want. I want to be loved the way I need to be loved. So how do you want to be loved the way you need to be loved? And so it gets harder. It's harder. Even knowing how to love someone becomes harder when you start realizing it's not all about you. And so the second commandment, the easier commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, easy to rattle off the tongue and figure you know what it means. And yet, after a lifetime of trying to do it, I'm still not very good at it. And I'm still trying hard to get better at it because I still blow it all the time. Now, on to the harder one. First commandment, love God with all of your being. What is that? Right? What does that even mean to love God with all of your being? Right? And all I have is, even after trying to do this my whole life, is hints and suggestions and guesswork. That's really what I'm doing, and that has all that I have ever been doing in my search for God. And I can tell you, with the deepest sincerity, I am a God lover. I love God. I love God in the sense of the commandment, which uses the word agape, which means to cherish. I cherish God. God is the most important thing in my life. And I never talk like that in casual conversation because I feel like the language has been cheapened. The well has been poisoned. I can't say I love God so much because when I hear people say that, I go, oh, that's not it, right? And yet, my whole life, there's been this sense of mystery and awe and wonder that has drawn me onward. I have been compelled to go on this spiritual journey. I have no other choice because fundamentally God called me. And I don't know how I can tell you that. It's just a feeling I have. That's it. I can code it in religious language or platitudes, and every time I do, I feel like it gets cheaper. And so what I have to just say is, I don't know how to put it into words. It's just something I felt from a very young age. And I can give you examples in my life of how, in certain experiences of worship or music, for me particularly, there are places when I was just caught up in a sense of transcendence and mystery and wonder, and how that continues to inform me to this day. And yet, even when I say that, I can just say, I just had that experience. I can talk about the hairs standing up on end in certain experiences. I can talk about how my life, I can look back and see that my life was going this way and then went that way after a certain experience of love, for example. And I can say God touched me in those places. And even that is sort of a working hypothesis. Because even when you say God touched me, well, I don't know, but I feel it. And so to love God is to cherish God, and then there are two words that matter to me about the love of God. One is seeking and the other is serving. And so we start by seeking God. When God touches us, when God calls us by name, we set out. And I feel like there's nothing to be proud of. It's just, you can't help it. You just, when you felt it, you go, I want more of that. And so you say, where do you find it? How do you get that thing that I felt? And so you start to seek God, and I'm still seeking God after all these years. And there are times when I feel like, yes, I've got it, and other times I feel like, nope, nothing there, nothing at all. You know, I can just be an atheist today. That's how it is. Right? You just have that experience, and it doesn't mean that the journey is over. I don't want to be an atheist. I don't even think I am, really, even when I feel like one. And because the journey is there, and the call is still there, and I still feel it. I'm God bothered. It's another wonderful expression. Being God bothered, right? And I am God bothered. And I've met other people who are God bothered for whom the whole Christian language is a problem, where they can't even talk that language because it gets in the way of what's actually bothering them. And so what I try to do is avoid that language for that reason, because in the end, God is calling us, and we know it. We know it in our hearts. And so to love God is to value that sense in our hearts that we have and say there's something real about that. It's not just a figment of our imagination. It's not just wishful thinking. There's something utterly valuable about what we have experienced. In fact, what we've experienced is the only thing that matters in this earthly life. That when we cherish God, when we love God, we say God is at the heart of the value of life itself. That's it. And how do we find God? We seek God in whatever way it is that we find God, and that's different for every person. I can talk for hours about music, and half of you, your eyes will just roll up in your heads because it doesn't do it for you the way it does it for me. I say, I love music. And you go, yeah, I love music too. I say, no. I love music. You don't get it. You know, and I love Jane's sermon last week about wine, because some people are like, oh yeah, I like wine. It's great, party, right? People say, no. You don't love wine. I love wine. Right? Getting tired trademarks. You know, that's someone who loves wine, right? Maybe you don't get that from it, they do. And they will talk about the spirituality of wine. They will. They really will, because it's this experience of beauty. How can this exist unless there is a God? And it sounds funny, but there's truth there. I mean, I feel the way about music. How can, like the music that has moved me and raised the hackles on my neck, and how can something so incredibly beautiful exist unless there is some kind of creative source underneath it that is bigger than that makes it possible? And that's my gateway into transcendence. For other people, it's heart stuff. It's just a simple act of kindness to a neighbor. How can that exist without something that animates the kindness in the first place? And it's that sense in your heart that knows where God is for you, where your access point is, and to cherish that in your life is loving God with your whole being. That's the seeking side. The other side is the serving side. It's when you start seeking God, at some level, it ceases to be about you. It's not about what God can do for me. It's about how do I submit myself to God's purposes. Because what we're seeking is an orientation, a direction. God is the animating principle underlying all creation. God is not a thing. God is not an old man sitting on a cloud with a beard. Not some guy in the sky. Not a flying spaghetti monster. That's not what God is. God is the language we use to talk about our intuitive sense that all of this exists for a reason, and that we exist for a reason. And in seeking that reason and serving that reason, we become servants of God. So what was God? Why did God make you? What are you called to do? And who are you called to be? And when you realize that purpose is over and above all of our temporary earthly desires, then everything becomes rightly ordered in our life, and including our earthly desires. They become rightly ordered. They find a place within the broader paradigm of seeking God's will. And so for me, that's the first one. And that's harder than loving your neighbor. Because how do you know what God wills for you? It's not easy. It's not just read the Bible and you get the instructions and that's it, end of story. It's not like that. Of course you read the Bible. Of course you study the ancestors in the faith to see how they found God's will for them. And we learn by their example. And we try to put that into practice where we too are seeking God's will for us. And so we train the muscles of our heart to seek God's will and to serve God. And it's a lifetime process, and all of us suck at it. Terrible. And yet, what else is there to do? What else matters about life? Really, are we really just going to play online? What's the Facebook time waster? Bejeweled? Is that what we're going to do with our life? Is that what the purpose of life is? Or is it to find out why we were meant to exist and then live that out? And we ultimately are the beneficiaries of that. Ultimately, we win. And that's the heart of evangelicalism, as far as I'm concerned. Because when you say, I have found something so important that it makes everything else in my life make sense and have structure and order and brings it all together into rightly ordered loves, then how can I not share that? How can I not wish that you could have that too? Even though I haven't completed it by a long shot. I can't say that I have it and I can hand it to you. I'm on the journey towards it. And even being on the journey towards it is better than not being. And of course, that's what we have to share as a religious community. That is the heart of the gospel, where Paul talks about sharing the gospel in spite of adversity, because it's okay. Of course there's going to be adversity. It's still worth it. And not only do I share the gospel with you, he says, but I share my very self with you. Because that is the gospel. The gospel is in here. It's not just words on a page. It's not just a set of ideas. If you have these ideas, you'll win at life. It's not like that. It's something that is mysterious and inward, and it's hard to put into words, and yet that's the heart of why we gather to worship on Sunday morning, to seek God, to serve God, and to serve our neighbor. Thanks be to God. Amen.